We're coming on the air with breaking news. President Trump just moments ago revealing Defense Secretary James Mattis is retiring. He will be leaving his post in February. The president says a new secretary will be named shortly thereafter. The news coming just 24 hours after President Trump abruptly announced a withdrawal of U.S. troops from Syria. President Trump tweeting just a short time ago, quote, General Jim Mattis will be retiring with distinction at the end of February after having served my administration as Secretary of Defense for the past 2 years. During Jim's tenure, tremendous progress has been made, especially with respect to the purchase of new fighting equipment. General Mattis was a great help to me in getting allies and other countries to pay their share of military obligations. A new Secretary of Defense will be named shortly. I greatly thank Jim for his service. Let's bring in our Chief Global Affairs Correspondent, Martha Raddatz, with us tonight. Martha, you and I were on the air last night here talking about the president's abrupt announcement that he's pulling U.S. troops out of Syria, that essentially the war against ISIS had been won, according to the president. And how much of a role do you think this is playing in General Mattis and his decision to retire?
Well, I certainly don't think it's I think it is not a coincidence that General Mattis has announced his retirement today, his resignation today, right after yesterday's announcement that we would be pulling troops out of Syria. This is something that Secretary Mattis did not want to do, did not support. He was very firmly in the belief that we needed to leave troops there. You also have to remember, David, that Secretary Mattis said he would stay as long as the president wanted him to stay, as long as he felt he had influence with the president. I was talking to someone very close to Secretary Mattis yesterday who said that perhaps Secretary Mattis, on principle alone, would feel this was time to go.
Martha, thank you. I want to bring in Terry Moran at the White House because, Terry, there was little notice that this was coming until the tweet from the president just a short time ago saying that Secretary Mattis would be out in February. He would be retiring, that a new defense secretary would be named shortly thereafter.
That's right, and this is consistent with the president's determination to take hold of foreign policy, as Martha was just talking about. He ran as a different kind of Republican, not a Bush Republican. He has said, you know, no more wars. He said he has been on this for years. He's now talking about withdrawing troops from Afghanistan. And for Jim Mattis, who had dedicated his life to a certain view of American power in the world, this might have been too much. They've been parting ways, clearly, on policy and even personally over the past few months. When Mattis was appointed Secretary of Defense, Trump proudly presented him as one of my generals. Mad Dog, he called Mattis, a nickname that General Mattis did not like. But they have parted company. But this is consistent with the campaign that Donald Trump won and the political views that he has, that the United States has been fighting too many wars overseas. This is all part of his America First policy that apparently General Mattis has decided he has contributed to as much as he can at the Department of Defense.
Terry, you don't need me to tell you there were many on Capitol Hill who saw this decision from the president in the last 24 hours as somewhat of a rebuke to the defense secretary, who had made it clear that he believed that this counterterrorism mission in Syria, particularly against ISIS, was not over. Terry, we'll be seeing you shortly on World News Tonight. In the meantime, I do want to bring in George Stephanopoulos because, George, we have this letter of resignation here in front of us. Jim Mattis writing to the president. I know you're poring over it too, but he does say at the very end, I very much appreciate this opportunity to serve this nation, our men and women in uniform. But he lays out the case as to why he wants to retire come February.
Very clear. He's saying that he has strong beliefs that we must be respecting our allies, working closely with our allies, and standing up strongly in and being resolute, and this is a quote, and unambiguous in our approach to those countries whose strategic interests are increasingly in tension with ours. It is clear that China and Russia, for example, want to share a world consistent with their authoritarian model, gaining veto authority over every other nation's economic, diplomatic, and security decisions. So he's not sugarcoating this at all. David, saying in the end that the president deserves to have someone who's more in line with his own views on these issues. And as both Terry and Martha suggested, this relationship has been unraveling for months. The president went around General Mattis on the issue of transgender in the military. He's been at odds with the president on this issue of Syria, on the potential withdrawal from Afghanistan as well. The president went so far just a few weeks ago in a televised interview to call General Mattis a Democrat, which in the president's view was a diss at that time. So it's been very clear that even though General Mattis has served the president, as the president says, honorably, that this relationship has been frayed over several issues, and if you even look also at the books by Bob Woodward and Michael Wolff, they reinforce that as well with some behind-the-scenes epithets that General Mattis was said to say in meetings after meetings with the president. He denied that at the time, but it is very clear right now that he is not going to hide his differences in approach with the president.
Tension in this relationship from the very start, as George points out. But, George, we should bring up the fact that there were many Republicans on the Hill, Republican senators who in the last 24 hours came out and said this move to get out of Syria, to withdraw U.S. forces and quickly, was a dangerous move. It shouldn't be done.
Led by the president's newest and strongest ally in the Senate, Lindsey Graham, who has been defending the president on so many issues, including on the Russia investigation of late, but he didn't hide his feelings about this. Said it was something that if President Obama did it, we would all be going crazy, and rightfully. So, yeah, the president facing so much opposition here. One of the big questions now will be who will he find, who can he find to replace General Mattis at the Pentagon, what those hearings will be like over issues like Syria and Afghanistan. And I think it should also be pointed out, David, if you now look, the president does not have his original Secretary of State. He will not have his original Secretary of Defense. He's gone through a national security advisor. Well, and as we've talked about, he's now heading toward his third chief of staff. This is unprecedented turnover at the top ranks of the government.
Major turmoil inside the Trump administration, as George points out, significant turnover. And for those who've been critical of President Trump's foreign policy along the way, there were many who believed that as long as General Jim Mattis was in charge of the Pentagon, they felt more comfortable about the direction of foreign policy in this country. A major headline breaking late this afternoon: General Jim Mattis will be retiring as Defense Secretary come February. President Trump revealing this in a tweet, saying they will name a new secretary shortly thereafter. Our thanks to George, Terry, and Martha. We'll have team coverage on this coming up shortly on World News Tonight. I'm David Muir. I'll see you then.
This has been a special report from ABC News.